Hello and welcome to Coffee Chat. Got my coffee. It's in a little owl mug. Isn't that cute? We're gonna go over a bunch of stuff from this week in NLP. So there'll be some research, some news, some just sort of, I don't know, general scuttlebutt and gossip. Just things you might want to know if you're working or want to work in NLP. So let's hop right in. I've got quite a few tabs to go through today. One sec, let me make sure I can see everybody in the chat. So if you say stuff, I know about it. All right. So hopping right on in. Julian Michel, probably, who is at UW NLP, where I got my PhD. Actually, UW NLP is a cross-department working group. Also, I think that should be a little bit better. Sorry, my levels are a little bit high. Hey, Luke, welcome to the stream. Nice to have you back. Has a NLP community meta survey. So if you're an NLP researcher, they're figuring out what the community thinks. So maybe something to check out if you are interested. Oh, sorry, what I was saying about UW NLP is that it's a like a cross-department group. So there's some people in electrical engineering, there's some people in computer science, there's some people in linguistics. All right. And then hopping into news. So this article is about the hugging face thing, I guess, research group project thing that they're working on. And the goal of that project, I think it's going to be a year long, is to replicate a bunch of work and make it open source, is my understanding. And this is the Big Science is the project. It's a research workshop, I guess. And they're going to be focusing on multilingual models and data sets. So interesting work, and this will be from, I guess they just finished up then, I guess, May 2022. Yeah, interesting. So I'm pretty sure this is what this was about, right? Yeah. Okay, so so the article is about the published work of the Big Science Year-Long project, all right, on replication and multilingual NLP. So just happened, it's done. If you are interested, check it out. Also, I feel like this disclaimer should have been at the top, but whatever. Hello, Multi Solutions Nicaragua. Sorry, that took some time for me to parse. Welcome to the stream. So outcomes. This is the big thing that they have done. Gonna click through some Notion links. Gonna move through some internal links. I have some coffee. Hello from Central America. Hello right back at you. Our southern neighbors, I guess. Your northern neighbors. Oh God, I'm tired. It's been a long week. Hence the coffee. So there's the 13 billion English decoder model, and then the Big Science 176 billion model, and then T0. So I believe these are replications of other existing studies. Sorry. The artifacting back there is from the chroma keying, and I have a natural light source in the room, and it's just been a little rough to deal with today. But if you're interested in checking out the replication efforts, it's all on, I guess probably the best top link would be bigscience.huggingface.co. Also on, I guess, the subject of Hugging Face and openness and open science. Last week there was the big thing with OPT, which we'll be talking about again because I imagine we're all going to be talking about it for a while, which is the replication of the GPT-3 model that Meta did and then open sourced, or Facebook. The Facebook model, the Meta model, they're the same thing. And Hugging Face has, constructed a way for you to use checkpoints so that you can load the model in Colab. And this is the 30B, not the 175B, so it's the smaller version, not the bigger version. But those of you who aren't familiar with Colab, it's a hosted Jupyter notebook provided by Google that I don't remember currently what the resources they make available are, but previously you had access to GPUs through Colab. So a really nice resource for folks who might otherwise not be able to do a lot of parallelization. So that might be of interest to some of you. All right. Speaking of Central America and South America, the America's NLP Workshop has been accepted as NeurIPS competition. So NeurIPS, previously called NIPS, is I would say it's the biggest purely deep learning focused research conference. So neural information processing systems, you're probably familiar with it if you've been in the field. If you're not, it's kind of a big deal. And they are, the America's NLP is a research-focused group, I guess, focused on Indigenous languages of the Americas. So if that's something that you're interested in, a really cool upcoming task focused on speech to text that I think will be, super interesting. And of course, love to see more tools being built by the people who benefit from them. So check that out. All right, and we're in the research portion now. Another really interesting paper from CA, I don't know what the tones on that are, who is at UT Austin here in Texas in the United States. There is a preprint that they did looking at whether or not GPT-3 was able to generate explanations for textual reasoning tasks. So this would be like reasoning about something like, oh, the artifacts went away. Okay, so if I stay exactly here, no, and don't look up, no, well, it's gone. Anyway, let's just read through the thread. I think that's going to be the easiest way to talk about this. So they were looking at question answering and natural language inference. So question answering a question. Natural language inference would be things like a common task is like word problems, right? Or math word problems. You know what? Sorry, one sec. I'm just going to fix this because it's, well, it'll be green. It really bothers me that the artifacts are coming in and out, and I can't fix that without getting blackout curtains, and that's not happening anytime soon. But I'll just deal with it, and I'll pretend I don't see it in the corner of my eye. And so they wanted to know whether or not, they could get an explanation that described, why a decision was made by the model and why the output that was produced. So an explainability study. I think this is an interesting problem because a lot of people who are, boosters of GPT-3 and other large language models will say that like they can't do that. I've seen a lot of claims to that effect, mostly sort of informally. And this paper provides evidence that that's really not the case. It doesn't seem to be, a reliable effect that you can get from the output. And as you can see here, explanations do not consistently improve in performance on these tasks. More concerningly, it generates explanations that aren't even correct, which again, not surprising given the model, but a lot of people have claimed things like it can do that. This is, evidence that it can. So here is an example. Jason helps Christopher, Kevin helps Stephanie, James punches Jonathan, Daniel is a typist, Jonathan is a typist, Christopher is a typist, Richard punches Daniel, Stephanie is a tailor. So the question is, who punches a typist? You can see that the answer, sorry, I'm having a complete breakdown of my ability to read here. Who punches a typist? Jonathan is a typist and Christopher is a typist. because James punched Jonathan, and Jonathan is a typist, the answer is James. Oh, I see. Okay, the generated explanations tend to be consistent with the predicted answers. Gotcha. So here's an example where Kelly is a chef, but the explanation that's provided is that Kelly is a farmer. And the question was, who helps a farmer? So the answer is Christopher, even though the answer should be who helps a farmer. So who helps Tiffany? No one. Jessica. Okay, Jessica's a farmer. So the answer should be Angela here and not Christopher because the explanation that's provided is incorrect, basically. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. I went a little bit down a rabbit hole there. Anyway, so just an interesting paper. It is a preprint. I don't think it's been published anywhere. So, grain of salt. But I always find these types of studies looking at limitations to be particularly helpful. Yeah, right. And then a new Aveva Burhain paper. Those of you who have been following me for a while know that I think she's an amazing researcher and always love to see new work from her. And this is on the forgotten margins of AI ethics. So I'm just going to make this bigger and we can read the abstract together. I know that is quite small for you, which is why I'm going to read it. So how has recent AI ethics literature addressed topics such as fairness and justice in the context of continual social and structural power asymmetries? We trace both the historical roots and current landmark work that has been shaping the field and categorize these works under three broad umbrellas: those grounded in Western canonical philosophy, mathematical and statistical methods, and those emerging from critical data algorithm information studies. We also survey the field and explore emerging trends by examining the rapidly growing body of literature that falls under the broad umbrella of AI ethics. To that end, we read, and annotated peer-reviewed papers published over the last 4 years in the two premier conferences, FACT and AIES. I don't actually know how people say that. It's been a while since I talked with speech to people in the field. Mostly online, we note that while the goals were often commendable, the consideration of the negative impacts on traditionally marginalized groups remained shallow. Taken together, our conceptual analysis and the data from annotated papers indicate that the field would benefit from an increased focus on ethical analysis grounded in concrete use cases, people's experiences, and applications, as well as from approaches that are sensitive to structural and historical power asymmetries. So basically, they looked at a bunch of papers and was like, hey, what's the state of the field? And found that sort of generally people could do better. And I seem to remember there being a particularly helpful figure down here while I was reading it. Yeah, so these were the 10 groups that were most mentioned or discussed in the annotated paper. Race and gender are by far the two most mentioned dimensions of the impacted groups, wowee, whereas things like age, sex, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, class, disability, or other marginalized groups are less mentioned, which is really interesting to me because particularly, this is sort of, AI ethics generally, it's not just focused on language, but particularly when it comes to things like access to things. Wow. Disability studies is a field, right? There's a lot to draw on there. There's a lot of, very smart people who should be folded into this work and be heard. Also, socioeconomic status, one that I would definitely think would be considered more often, but apparently it is not the super large focus, which, I get it. It's hard to study SES, right? Particularly in the US, it's really hard to survey people about their SES because everyone will say they're middle class because we don't have the same sort of class structure that is pushed onto consistently the way that folks in England do, for example. But interesting. Or like in New Zealand, if you ask people about their socioeconomic status or what class they are, often you will just get answers that are not helpful. So that's that paper. I think it'll be a really good read, especially if you're interested in sort of the state of the field and where folks could do better. And then we talked about this RealML tool last week, 2 weeks ago. And this is a blog post that's a little bit more, I think, user-friendly. And like I said, I think that this is a really good way to talk about the limitations of research. So like this, like this paper that's all on the limitations of a specific model, a good thing to include in the original model paper. And I think it's a nice framework. So just a slightly more palatable way to learn about it if that's something you're interested in. And then this is a paper I actually haven't had time to read yet, but is probably at the top of my to-do list right now because it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. And as you noticed earlier, there's a big push towards openness, particularly like the Hugging Face people are putting a lot of money into that and open sourcing things, making things accessible and available. And I think there's, I work with an open source product, so it's something that I think about a lot. What should and shouldn't be open source, right? What are our ethical obligations as open source developers, as people working on / with open source tools? And this is a paper specifically about deepfakes. And, if you create an open source library that has a lot of harmful applications and you make it available and you create a tool that makes it easier to do things, and many / most of the things that can be done with that tool are bad and hurt people, should that really be open source? And I think this is something that I've been thinking about, particularly with OPT coming out, the Meta / Facebook open source version of GPT-3. Should they have done that? So I think this is a really cool paper. And one thing that they pulled out, and again, I haven't had a chance to finish reading it. I want to. I've just been so busy, had a lot going on. Is that there's so FOSS, open source software, right, is like a thing that you can build, but free and open source software in particular is like a political philosophy and movement, basically. If you're not familiar with it, it's a whole big thing. The iceberg is big. And one of the sort of core principles there is freedom zero, a principle that one ought to be able to use software for any purpose, plus neutral, inevitable tech constrained senses of agency, right? So there's this feeling in the FOSS communities in particular that tech is neutral, tech doesn't, the tools are not the ends, so you should just make the tools available, which is interesting. I don't know, just a lot to unpack there. And it's something I'm thinking a lot about, and I have a lot of sort of half-baked thoughts on it. And I might do a video on that at some point because it's something that, I think is really important for us to think about, particularly as we're moving towards having more and more open source tools where those tools are very powerful and have a lot of malicious applications. Speaking of malicious applications, this is such a cool paper. So this is from ACM, and it was at YSEC, not a conference that I'm familiar with, but this is I think it's a security conference, which is not like my core area. Jorge says, maybe George, sorry if I said that wrong. The ethical AI and open source is quite interesting and worth debating topic. Politically speaking, we know the motivations of the case in big tech, just making money, but what about open source? That is a great, it's a great question. So, people do open source for a number of reasons, right? So fun, I think, is a big one. Fun and enjoyment, and liking working on the tool. That's something that I run into a lot. Another is the idea that they don't want to replicate work. So if you work on something together in public, you can make everybody's lives a little bit easier. Particularly in a security setting, it can make sense for something to be open source so that people can dig through it and see, oh, okay, this, I can tell that this is good for these reasons and I know what's going on here. But then there are other cases where, it being open might be not great. So, in privacy perturbation software, right? You don't necessarily want that open source if it's possible, if it would make it easier to reverse those perturbations, that sort of thing. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think I'm committing to no timelines, but it's something that I really want to think about more and dig into more. Anyway, so this is a really interesting so this is a really interesting paper. I'll just read it through. So it's about an attack on smart speakers, basically. In this work, we demonstrate the potential to exploit the existing biases in these systems to achieve a new attack goal. So these are gender and racial biases. We consider the potential for command disruption by an attacker that can be conducted in a manner that allows for access and control of a victim's voice assistant device. We present a novel attack which crafts specialized chatter noise to exploit racial and gender biases in speech recognition systems for the purposes of command disruption. So, someone says, order a roll of toilet paper, and instead they order, I don't know, 20 cases of perfume to be sent to somebody else's address, that sort of thing. We also evaluated the effectiveness of 3 types of chatter noise for disruption and demonstrate the American English male chatter is consistently most successful. So the examples were American English male, Nigerian female, and Korean female. Comparing the average success rate of each chatter type in scenarios where disruption was achieved, we find that when targeting the Google Home Mini Smart Speaker, the American English chatter noise increases average disruption success compared to other types of chatter. Also, in targeting the Amazon Echo, the American English male chatter noise increased average disruption success to the Nigerian female and Korean female chatter noises by these percents. So the fact that there are, biases in who speech recognition systems works well for makes them more susceptible to attacks that mimic the types of people for whom they work very well. I don't know. I just think that's a cool paper. I think it's cool. Also, there's a lot of ways that people can attack smart speakers. It's something. There's a paper a while ago on using lasers to trigger a smart speaker, and again, like use it to access data or order things or other malicious things. Anyway, and this one is from Luke. Thanks, Luke. He passed it on. It's another paper on leveraging zero-shot text classification by topic modeling. And I don't actually know. Okay, so this has been accepted to the International Conference on Computational Processing of Portuguese. Not a conference I'm familiar with, but I don't work on Portuguese, so probably a factor there. And it sounds like basically what they're doing here. So zero-shot learning is basically learning something with no examples, which usually is done through some sort of transfer learning. Luke says, yay. Usually it's done through some sort of transfer learning. So usually there's not no examples, there's just no relevant examples, and you take a pre-trained model. The best results reported with this approach use language models such as transformers, but fall into 2 problems: high execution time and the inability to handle long texts as input. This I definitely run into. This I hadn't heard as much from practitioners, but I also mainly work in chatbots, which you don't generally tend to have very large tech inputs into. So turn length tends to be fairly short in chatbots. This paper proposes a new model, ZeroBerto, which leverages an unsupervised clustering step to obtain a compressed data representation before the classification task. So basically, to create the embeddings, first you do, clustering. I'm sure some sort of dimension reduction. I haven't read the paper. I'm just skimming. And we show that it has better performance for long inputs and shorter execution time. So it sounds like there's almost like an unsupervised labeling step in the middle to create, slightly more granular representations before the rest of the stuff happens in the model. It's an intermediate step. And then they were specifically looking at low resource languages. So yeah, kind of interesting. I'm assuming Portuguese based on the place where you put a paper is called venue. Ooh. Yeah. All right. And then there's there it is. Okay. I was like, I can't get rid of oh my God. Sorry. Yeah. I don't use my usual browser for these things, and there's just so much stuff in there that doesn't get caught when you don't have an ad blocker. Great to see more Hispanics, Latino fellows being influential in the research area. Yeah, it is. There's actually a research group, Latinx in AI. It's not like it's like a special interest group, I guess. It's similar to Black in AI. And I believe they're going to have a workshop at ECL 2022 in Seattle, 2023 in Seattle. So just, if you are interested in finding more folks, I think that would be a good place to look. I think they also have like a directory of researchers. Yes, and this is basically just another sort of general audience discussion of OPT, and sure enough, it has, you know, very biased output and says horrible, awful things, and we all knew that. Maybe you didn't know that. If you were here last week, you knew that. So just yet another article on it. And then this is a book that has been out for a while, but I haven't read, and it just sounded cool. Anthony said, "Are you going to NACL?" No, probably not. I'm not planning to travel for conferences for the foreseeable future, basically, which is part of the reason I'm doing this, right? So I can have that sort of chit chat experience. Yeah, just for a number of reasons, it doesn't make sense for me. Yeah. Anyway, so it is about designing and how design can be used to, you know, help people and make the world better. So it sounds like an interesting book. Again, something I'd like to read. I don't have a whole lot of time for reading stuff just at the moment, but soon, hopefully. Anyway. And then also Sasha is super active on Twitter if you want to follow them. I think they're also on Mastodon, so another place. Oh, also I'm on Mastodon if you are interested, and it just everything I say on Twitter also gets said on Mastodon. So I think it's rctatman at mastodon.com. I should add it to my website. I'll do that at some point. So speaking of, we were just talking about in the paper on deepfakes and open source and ethics, how there's the idea that tech is neutral, which I think is very common, right? I think there's this idea that like it's the uses of the tool. I don't know. I don't have a good way of expressing that. Paul says, a bit random. My sister is a software engineer working on an automated call tree conversation modeling. No ML, all backend. Oh, nice. Yeah, it's one of the earliest systems that was super popular that used conversational AI was a stock price checker, right? So this was before the internet. And you could call in and be like, what's the stock price? And you'd like go through the phone tree. All of that is to say that sometimes phone trees are all you need, right? I pick up my groceries every week, and there's like a two-step phone tree, conversation tree, and it's, you know, very fast, and that's all it needs to be. Yeah, maybe not most, but many chatbots just don't need to be ML chatbots. They can just be role-based chatbots. It's fine. Yeah, so this is from Forrester, which is like a industry think tank researchy thing. I know they do like business reports on specific verticals. Business. And there is a blog post that I believe is based on a keynote on how technology is not neutral. Okay, so the keynote was by Tim Cook, who some of you may know. Pretty famous tech leader. This is the point, the main point of the article. Anyway, sorry. Wow. Oh, Paul says, I suggested your channel and she loved the RPG game of animals at a software engineering interview. Oh, I'm really glad she liked it. That was really fun. Yeah, I'd like to do that again at some point. I like DMing or GMing. Anyway, so more discussion on this idea of tech not being neutral if you're interested. I think Sarah Watson is also pretty active on Twitter, so another good person to follow. Speaking of technology not being neutral and what happens, I know I mentioned data brokers quite a bit last week, but another article about them. So it was a study that came out a little bit a while ago on basically how the American government. So for those of you who don't know a lot about American politics and law and et cetera, George says we need you back on Kaggle. I don't know. I might do some Kaggle stuff in the future. We'll see. I'm tired. I'm rearranging stuff in my life right now. So in the US, you have legal protections against unnecessary search and seizure, right? So basically, law enforcement can't just like look into your stuff. There's like legal protections that you have. Does that apply to your data? Question mark. Like in theory, yes, but if you ever, there's a lot of loopholes, right? There's a lot of sort of creep in how much access law enforcement has to private citizens' data. So if you've ever had like recommendation that if you're going through the airport, you should turn off your fingerprint sensor and your face detection to unlock your phone, because they can't make you unlock their phone, but they can like hold it up to your face to use that to unlock your phone and then have access to it. Is sort of where things stand right now. Anyway, and this was a big study that showed that ICE, which is a very young agency, maybe less than 10 years old, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and it only holds like legal authority like right by borders, basically, and has done some really atrocious human rights abuses and is continuing to do them. Anyway, not a fan of the agency, if you can't guess, on account of, again, the human rights abuses. So there are legal restrictions about what they can do about getting people's data, but this study found that they were basically just buying information about people from data brokers and then using it, and that wasn't restricted, right? So they couldn't like ask you for that data, but they could like ask a data broker for it and then buy it from them. So yeah, bad. Not good news. Also, I mentioned they only have sway over like legal authority, like quite close to the border. The vast majority of people in the U.S. live in that sort of like band next to the borders, including the ocean borders. That time. Another opinion piece. So this one is by Emily Bender, so a professor of computational linguistics at the University of Washington. Emily's great. And a great piece that she wrote about how, you know, a lot of reporters tend to have a very credulous view when they are told things by, you know, tech companies, basically, and pushing back about that a little bit. And like, I get it, especially if you don't have much training in, you know, artificial intelligence or, you know, algebra. A lot of the claims could be very fantastical and seem like, oh, maybe that is true. But just sort of a suggestion for journalists, basically, about, you know, how you could potentially be a little bit less credulous about claims. And this came up with a conversation with a colleague, and I thought it might be interesting to bring up here. So there's this idea of the data union, and there's a couple conflicting schools of thought here, right? So speaking about data brokers, right? People out there right now have your data and are selling it to people. How do I know that I have your data? Well, you are watching me on the internet, so probably, almost certainly, unless you have unbelievably scrupulous digital hygiene, which should not be on us as individuals. So one way that you could push back against this is you could say, well, you have to pay people for their data, right? That, you know, you have ownership over your data, and if other people are going to use it, they need to pay you for that. And that's sort of the idea behind the data union. And there's conflicting school of thought that I personally tend to agree more with, that if I can buy your data, right, then it is less that you have an intrinsic right to privacy, right? Well, I mean, Whether or not people in the US have a right to privacy anymore is a second question that is kind of looking like maybe no, actually. Great time. But if I can buy your data, right, and that is just like an accepted and widely available thing, then people who are economically marginalized really can't say no, right? So if, I'm doing pretty well for myself and I'm like, hey, I'll pay you $10 for your Google history, I'll be like, no, it's private. I don't want to share that information. But if if I am $10 short on rent, I'm going to say yes, even if I prefer not to share that information because I need the money. I feel like treating it as transactional and putting a price tag on it really makes it coercive. And my stance on that really comes from not data ethics. Data ethics, yeah, but really research ethics. So can people say no without having negative consequences? And in the case where this is a marketplace, the answer is kind of no, right? Unless you have enough money to get around it. Hector says, hey, how are you? I'm doing okay. I'm tired, very tired. Do you produce a monthly newsletter about your field? I don't. It's something I've thought about. So all of the links I have, I've just been like collecting together. I don't know. I did a Twitter poll a while ago to see if people were interested, and I think only about 30 people were like, yeah, I'd read that. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm going to spend time putting together a newsletter if 30 people are going to subscribe. Y'all are great, but that's not, not great scale for me personally. So maybe if there is interest, I would consider it as sort of where I'm at. All right. So continuing to think about other things in this sort of phase. Gosh, sorry. I really wish the light would stop changing. We're having sort of like sunny/clouds today, and every time the sun and or clouds come out, it changes the color of the pixels. It changes the way the light falls on the green screen, changes the color of the pixels, and makes the chroma keying I did slightly less accurate. So Cassie Feisler, who is fabulous, I highly recommend following her if you don't. She is at CU. I don't know where that is. Okay, the Colorado University at Boulder. And really a lot of great stuff that she says. Live tweeted about a content moderation workshop. So I'm just gonna read through these because I thought that it was very interesting and useful. And part of the reason that it was particularly timely is if you're not familiar, Elon Musk has a bid in to buy Twitter right now. Whether or not it happens is like, we'll see. Dr. Gia says, haven't seen you since Kaggle days. Oh, hey, welcome. Yeah, I've been working on chatbots mostly. I'm doing this stream weekly, probably gonna stay at this time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. A very late time in India, I think. I don't know, I try to say EST because I know a lot of IST because I know a lot of y'all are in India. Anyway, Elon Musk said he was going to buy Twitter. And it hasn't happened yet. And like whether or not it happens is like, that's another question. Not a person who follows through on his promises in general. But he's made a lot of like sweeping claims about how content moderation would be different. So hence this being a timely topic. So the first talk, which was by Joris van Hoboken, perhaps, who is a professor, is about the EU Digital Services Act, about midnight in Europe. Yeah, it's a little late. I might rejigger the time a little bit to find something that's more helpful for folks. Or maybe I'll do 2 a week, one on, I'll figure it out. Digital Services Act we talked about last week has a lot of protections for people in Europe, in the EU, but will probably also affect people in the rest of the world at least a little bit. For which I've mostly seen discussions of algorithmic transparency and data access, but also has strong implications for content moderation. The final text isn't available yet, but I believe it is passed, so like it is going to happen. A lot of DSA is driven by transparency and accountability and requires new data and reporting, including data access for researchers, as well as risk mitigation practices and requirements for diligent, objective, and proportionate terms of service enforcement. It's unclear what we might expect when it comes to risk assessment / mitigation requirements. How do you operationalize risk, illegal content, fundamental rights? Casey's editorializing wrong and bad, ? So this is from Musk. If there are tweets that are wrong and bad, they should be either deleted or made invisible, and a temporary suspension is appropriate, but not a permanent ban. Yeah, wrong and bad is something. A lot of tweets that I think are both of those things, but also I think should keep being available and people should be able to make without being suspended. In the next square, in the next talk, we've gotten our first hit to one of my favorite bingo squares, Lessig's models of regulation. So I think this is let's look. I don't have to guess. Friction by design, platform policy. So this is a discussion about how to create policy on platforms, basically. In talking about regulation, she breaks down, breaks down what you can regulate, that you can regulate industry structure, e.g. antitrust, or you can regulate the system, e.g. liability, transparency, data access, or product design, including healthy friction. Product design as a space for solutions recognizes that a lot of harms are algorithmic rather than policy-based. So what if we introduce friction, i.e. digital speed bumps, as a way of promoting reflection? I think algorithmic here means sort of like emergent given automated processes rather than, explicitly hard-coded. George says, Yanis Varoufakis, Varoufakis, is a great if you want to learn more about the data-driven economy in the 21st century. All his talks are eye-openers. Oh, great resource. Thank you for sharing. Adding friction. What about a circuit breaker for online platforms? So they can't be willfully blind to traffic on the platform. A certain level of virality triggers a halt and manual look at the content. I think that TikTok might have something like this. It's very unclear what TikTok's policies are. And Gabe Nicholas from the audience, points out that circuit breakers can be faulty, e.g. BLM videos on TikTok trip some kind of spam detector. Stay tuned for tomorrow when I rant briefly about moderation mistakes on TikTok. TikTok moderation is something. I remember there was a while ago when there's pretty good evidence that they were down-weighting content by basically anyone who wasn't super thin, which is, the fat phobia. Another really good bingo square, what if everything is speech because everything is just code, e.g. even in the metaverse, which makes a lot of things more challenging to regulate. The next talk from G. Sullivan focuses on the hash sharing database in GIFCT, known images created by terrorist groups, a technological regulatory device that reconfigures power. I don't know about this. I don't know. Infralegalities is an interesting concept, that which is below, inferior to, and underneath, but also within the international legal framework of analysis, i.e. background, socio-technical conditions, and practices. With a shout out to Boker and Starr. So these are this is a field that I'm only very peripheral to, but also very interesting. This discussion of hash sharing databases brings up the power such systems have to create definitions and taxonomies. Okay, so if it's a database of images that are included in the database nominally because they're related to terrorism, then if you have created an image that's in the database, then it has a relationship to you, right? That label. I think that's that point there. This is, of course, an incredibly important point to content moderation generally, the power of operationalization. I don't know why this word is so hard for me to say. The power of operationalizing. So basically, how do you, thinking about it in a machine learning standpoint, what are your labels and how do you get from unlabeled thing to labeled thing? What are you measuring there? Important point from G. Sullivan that hash matching is famously unable to understand context. IMO inability to understand context is the problem of automated moderation that we can't solve. Yeah, particularly in a linguistic sense. Next talk is by Sarah Scheffler on content moderation capabilities and challenges in the context of end-to-end encryption, e.g. Apple's proposed CSAM detection. Interesting point would be transparency for different stakeholders. What does the platform learn about removed content? What does the sender learn about whether and why their content was removed? What does the viewer learn about the fact that they didn't see some content? Pros and cons of match lists. Less likely to have false positives than AI. This must be for images. But of course, you have to know about the offending content ahead of time. So the use cases for content moderation are pretty limited, though it makes sense for some, e.g. CSAM. And of course, there are obvious pros and cons of AI moderation. Understatement. For human moderation, there's the trauma problem for commercial moderation. Yeah, that is a big one. More bottom-up approaches have benefits, but e.g. user reporting is vulnerable to coordinated mass reporting. Yeah, there's a lot of people have, horrible psychological trauma. I'm thinking particularly there was a lot of discussion recently about YouTube moderation. And like, if your job is to, look at horrible things all day and be like, yes, that's horrible, that's going to affect you, right? That's going to cause, serious psychological harm. At the same time, if you're relying on your users, you can have a coordinated attack that like, hey, we're all going to get rid of this person on the platform. Everyone who's like agrees with me, we're going to swarm and we're going to report every single one of their posts. I think this is something that happens quite a bit to, activists, for example. Next up, Tarleton G. Gillespie is the G. Latest book is Custodians of the Internet. Points out how content moderation is more than just what trust and safety teams are doing. It's not just removal of content. Algorithmic recommendation is part of the picture too, despite being discussed so differently. That's a good point, yeah. Also, when people outside of tech say the algorithm, usually they mean recommendation algorithms. It is interesting that the free speech debate focuses so strongly on how content is removed rather than recommended. But we know that when content is recommended, it means that something else is not recommended. So are these things really so different? Someone somewhere is deciding when something is moderation and therefore a content policy concern, and when something is recommendation and therefore a ranking concern. For example, YouTube has stated that they intentionally reduce the spread of content that comes close to, but does not quite cross the line of violating community guidelines. TikTok has also talked about intentionally limiting visibility of certain content. Also points out the subtle but real distinction between choosing to see content and being recommended content. I think that this is really important, a part of what people mean by getting on the wrong side of TikTok, both as a creator and consumer. Plus, the idea of the platform amplifying content is a huge part of the moral discussion around content on platforms. Like, yes, not removing harmful stuff is bad, but amplifying / recommending harmful content is worse, and the opposite of recommendation is reduction. There's been a lot of studies recently that show that, extreme right-wing content is, far more recommended and amplified than, left-wing content. And now Tarleton G makes the point that worries me the most, the lack of transparency when it comes to reduction. Because what is normal reach to compare to? And given that there's a huge important conversation about suppression of marginalized voices, ugh. So like I mentioned with, the TikTok fat phobia, which also includes, a number of other axes as well. I agree use of the word shadow banning is problematic because it has a specific meaning to platforms, content not being visible to others at all, that isn't what people are complaining about. They mean, like, I have 1 million followers and this video got 1K views. Reduction. The overall point here is that we should be looking at all the ways that it's decided what we see and don't see on platforms. Content removal is only one part of that picture, and in some ways we're working on problems that are already out of date. Whew. And then it's quite a long thread, so I'll just read until the fold. Yeah, great point. And yeah, so very recently, Twitter introduced the ability to have a just timeline, basically, so that you see the most recent content first instead of the recommended feed homepage. And that was, I am sure, getting ahead of the DSA regulations, because that's one of the things that it requires, is that you have to provide a, first in, first out timeline view of content as well, something unranked. Yeah. Anyway, great points. I recommend the thread. I recommend following Casey. She's great. Overall, just interesting and important things to think about. All right. Oh, and this is what we were looking at: friction by design, platform policy. All right. And then also thinking about helping people. George says, we need organizations like the UN or Interpol to deal with these issues. Sadly, organizations like these appear after wars and terrible times, but they are needed. Too many Elons out there. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think in theory, professional organizations, right, like the ACM or ACL, should be able to help guide practitioners. But, people live in societies, and there's really, it's a lot easier for people to do the right thing if that's the also the legal thing, right? It's a lot harder to push back against something when it's going to harm you, and the organization you're part of is not going to see negative effects because of it in the near term, right? I am, not unsympathetic, but yes. So, we've been talking about the DSA. The AI Act is a separate one, and we also looked at it very briefly. But it's even draftier than the DSA. But anyway, so this discussion is about how the AI Act can help to protect migrants. So, good dog. I mean, again, perhaps obviously, right now there's a lot of migration going on in Europe, and there has been for a while, with large-scale humanitarian crises quite near Europe. People are trying to migrate into Europe. And this really talks about how AI can, help and improve the situation. So just sort of a general discussion. And here are the recommendations for how, or this organization's recommendations for how the Act itself can be updated for additional protections. So update the AI Act's prohibited AI practices to include unacceptable uses of AI systems in the context of migration. These should include prohibitions on AI-based individual risk assessment, and sorry, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see a little bit better. AI-based individual risk assessment and profiling systems in the migration context, drawing on personal and sensitive data, AI polygraphs in the migration context, predictive analytic systems, which, when used to interdict, curtail, and prevent migration, and a full prohibition on remote biometric identification and categorization in public spaces, including the border and migration control settings. So this is really just about, protecting people's rights and autonomy and avoiding the situation where, we're not going to let you come in the country because computer says no. Include within high-risk use cases AI systems and migration control that require clear oversight and accountability measures, including all other AI-based risk systems, predictive analytic systems used in migration, asylum and border control management, biometric identification systems, and AI systems used for monitoring and surveillance and border control. So the high-risk use cases would have additional, protections and legislation around them. And then amend Article 83 to ensure AI as part of large-scale EU IT databases are within the scope of the AI Act, and the necessary safeguards apply for uses of AI in the EU migration context. So these are, recommendations for legal changes to provide more protection to migrants around the use of automated processes. So if you are in the EU, maybe something to reach out to your representatives about and tell them you support. I don't know how to talk to your elected representatives in the EU. I only know about America. And by America, I mean the US. So, we're in the news and regulation portion now. They're sort of my topic. I just didn't tell you when the topic changed. I should do that in the future. This is big good news if you're in the US. So Clearview, I've talked about them before. All our faces are in their system without our consent and without our ability to remove them. big Clearview AI legal settlement, no selling to private companies in the US because they used to be able to sell to like straight up anybody. This, potentially illegally collected data and information. No police or government sales in Illinois for 5 years. The court case was in Illinois. And no more free trial account for cops. Pretty big changes, all thanks to one privacy law in a single state, which is great. So really reducing the ways that they can use this technology. I've talked about Clearview AI. One of my least favorite companies. They are on the list of companies that I do not approve of in the strongest possible terms. Yeah, so great all around good news. I would say. Also, the thing where you could just get a free trial account if you work as a police officer is great that they were doing that. Not great that they were doing that. But they can't do it anymore, so that's good. And then last thing, just a little sort of like scuttlebutt. Hugging Face had another funding round, and they raised $100 million. So it's a pretty solid funding round. It's news. There you go. All right, so that is all that I had for this week, and it is wild how no matter how many things I have, it always takes about an hour. Weird how that works out. It's not intentional. It's just how long it takes. So yeah, we talked about, research that's, new to me. Some of the things that came out a little bit ago, but I'm just learning about now. Like Bias Hacker. Oh, that was this month. Okay, so it hasn't been out that long. Zero Berto came out in January. So thanks for pointing that out, Luke. I certainly was not on my radar. Yeah, lots of interesting reading, lots of interesting thinking. And I don't know. I am really thinking about sort of like openness and ethics, and I am not a hardcore FOSS person, but I do think in general open source is good. Like, I support open source in general, but I also think that there are things that should not be open source, and that's something I'm continuing to mull over. So we'll talk about it more in the future. But that's pretty much all I've got for this week. So thank you so much for joining me today. We talked about a lot. I'm gonna leave it on this screen, get some good news on there. Yeah, so we'll be back next week. It's just me. I'll be back next week with other things I saw and was like, oh, I want to talk about that on the stream, which is my extremely scientific way of doing this. Thanks for joining me. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, a great week, and I will talk to you this time next week. Bye. I got a screen for that. One second, let me use it.